Welcome to our second webinar of the 2020 Brand Vision series. This is brought to you by the Brand Registry Group, or BRG for short. My name is Martin Sutton, the Executive Director of the BRG, which is a trade association for brands that operate their own top-level domain or intend to apply at the next opportunity. For many brands, those that already operate their own top-level domain, as well as those considering applying in the future, the development of a business case can be both complex and daunting. So in our webinar today, we will see how this can be approached and provide insights to modeling return on investment across digital marketing, brand protection, and security. So I'm extremely pleased to introduce you today to Peter LaMantia. He's the CEO of Authentic Web, and Peter has been an active member of the Brand Registry Group, representing a brand operator, and also leading our Registry Operations and Best Practices Committee over the last year. Today, Peter will be presenting a high-level view for you today, and we will have an opportunity at the end of his presentation for questions and answers. During the presentation, you can populate your questions in the question panel, so please do that. We'll keep an eye on those so that when we get to the end of the presentation, we'll be prepared to spend some time to cover off those questions. So with that, I will now hand you over to Peter.
Great, thanks Martin. Thanks everybody for joining today. Today, what I want to do is put some meat on the bones with a business case model to support the adoption and investment in a brand TLD strategy. At its foundation, this is really a numbers-based business case of how your organization can reduce your total cost base and drive top-line contribution margin. It's a financial model roadmap for top-performing businesses to jump the curve and anchor all digital on the trust authority of a proprietary brand top-level domain. So if you like business model math, I think you're going to find this pretty compelling, and hope you find it useful as a methodology to build, communicate, and gain investment approval from your C-level. It's going to be a little bit of a fun with math webinar. So I think I'll just get rid of my face so you can see the full screen. So when we talk about jumping the curve, you probably know this concept. As Forbes states, it's not just about a new product. It can also mean adapting to a changing environment, streamlining business process, or adopting new technologies. In the context of domains, DNS, and TLS certificates, formerly known as SSL certs, and brand protection, we think about the first generation starting in the mid-90s, with manual processes, silos, both systems and people, ticketing systems, email, or telephone. The second generation, as many of you may have adopted or are in the process of establishing more sophisticated automation systems with workflow, change management controls, audit, policy-based provisioning, or role-based permissioning to deliver better security, compliance, and performance. The second generation improved the function and total cost of ownership, but at the core there was still the accumulation of more domains to manage, more DNS to lock down, more certificates to administer, and more brand protection budget and activity to fend off the bad actors. And with the expansion of the domain space, this is becoming increasingly difficult and costly. Let's face it, you own a lot of domains, and you really don't want to own them, but you have to, and you can't let them go. So now we're entering a paradigm shift as the third third change or evolution. To brand top-level domains. They are secure, controlled, authentic, they're platforms for innovation, and massively scalable. So, thinking about the status quo, in the early 1990s, it was easy. One domain, one registrar, one name server, probably a C-level and an IT resource. At that time, there was not even digital piracy. Life was simple then. That's a little house on the prairie before electricity. Over the next 20 years, it's become increasingly complicated with hundreds and thousands of domains, multiple registrars, many more DNS providers, and everyone in the organization is a stakeholder in domain names, and ever more domains are registered. A handful for revenue generating activity, but the lion's share are just defensively to protect against these nefarious actors. It's complicated and has driven the adoption of new systems. And on the brand protection side, it has also become increasingly costly, complicated with exploding counterfeiting and piracy, and an entire digital vendor ecosystem that continues to eat up more and more of your budget every year, expected to double from 2018 to 2026 by this research from Verified Market Research. So it's always good to get a sense of what you're experiencing and sharing that with other people on the webinar. So I'm going to ask Martin to lob a poll out there, and if you'd indulge us to conduct a couple examples. Do you have the poll up there, Martin?
Yeah, the polls are up and running on the screen for the attendees, yeah.
Okay, great. So think about, what's your status quo today? What are the increasing costs, more domains, DNS to manage them, more local presence, more cycles, and DNS security policies? How are you managing that today, and how do you think that cost might change in 5 years from today? Just give everybody a minute there.
We'll just give a few more seconds to let the audience select, but most are in now. So we'll just give 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1, and I shall share the results.
Okay, great. Okay, so that's interesting. So 56% believe sort of 10 to 25, another 40% between 25 and 100. So I think there's pretty much agreed that the costs are going to go up. So the second poll, let's do one more here. Let me know when that's up there, Martin. All right. Yeah. Now think about the efficacy of those added costs, added domains, and expenditures. In 5 years, what do you think the efficacy will be of those programs? Will it be better? Will it be worse? Will it be the same? Most people I talk to comment on how it's a whack-a-mole game. More systems can simply create more work and expose more problems. So we'll just let these, let's see some coming in here. So just click on the button, what you think.
We'll just go a few more seconds. There's still a few more to vote. Okay, thanks for that. I shall reveal now the poll.
Okay, great. Well, about 38% about the same, 31% a little more effective, so that's a good view, and about 30% somewhat or significantly less effective. So, okay, so what we've established is costs are going to grow, and they have grown. They've continued to grow over the past several years, from the first day you registered a domain name through the new round of TLDs in 2012, 2014. So we kind of look at this and say the status quo is going to continue to drive cost increases. Some believe more than others. So the status quo is this rising line. And it may be a straight line, but it also may accelerate over time as the bad guys continue to become more efficient and effective in how they try to compromise your brand. And this view on brand TLDs is saying stop. Do you really want to keep driving up this cost with having, as the poll indicated, maybe marginal improvement, but generally the same or worse? So that's what we want to address. And that's where we believe a brand top-level domain strategy is really an elegant way to address this problem. It's a proprietary space. It's trusted. You can lock it down with security. You control everything. It's massively scalable and offers opportunities for innovation. So this slide is really to define a strategy, and then we'll talk about some numbers. So we've got our status quo costs. They're increasing constantly and will continue to do so if you drive no change today. The strategy is to say, start investing in your brand TLD. Make the market aware that it's your space and it's secure and customers can trust it. And as you do that, you can begin to reduce some of your status quo costs over time. So the end of these arrows is really 5, 6 years out. So the question is, where do you want to be? Would you rather be out chasing domains and trying to register stuff, or would you rather have a position of trust with a lower cost structure, a controlled space, more effective communications and engagement, and the ability to improve security and compliance? So what's the business case to support that? So there's a few factors here. First of all, there's an ability to reduce your total cost of ownership over your domains, DNS, TLS, and brand protection. You can also improve consumer trust. You can launch programs that are differentiated in the market to separate yourself from your competitors. And with those, you should be able to drive top-line revenue growth and contribution margin increases. So with those views, we did the math. So I developed an ROI calculator to look at this. Now, you're going to have to get your glasses out and move closer to the screen here for a few, but now we're going to do the fun with math. So the calculator sort of looks at a few things. The first thing it's looking at is domains, DNS, and TLS or SSL certificates. What is the cost today? How many domains do you own? How many do you expect to register over time? What are the vendor costs from registrars, TLS, and other vendors, managed DNS? And what are the internal human resource costs that often get missed in this? Domains and DNS and TLS, it's a pain, and it takes a lot of cycles. And then if you look at it on the status quo of how you're going to increase that, how many new domains you're going to register, what's the price inflation expected in TLDs. We know that .com prices have been approved to increase by 7%. I think we should expect other registries to also increment their fees. So if we look at that over a period of 5 years, and then we look at if you drove a brand TLD strategy, and we're now able to start culling some of these domains and reducing some of this activity, you could find some benefit. So we did that for this area in domains, DNS, and TLS. We did it for brand protection. We looked at what are the services that you may be employed right now, how many UDRPs you file every year, how many domains that you end up acquiring, and also what are the internal HR time consumptions of brand protection specialists, legal counsel, and we looked at it from a status quo and a 5-year as well. We then, of course, looked at the other side. What are the costs to acquire your brand TLD? Year 0 is about capital. It's acquiring an asset. So what are the costs to acquire? What are the costs to set that up? And then from year 1 through to year 5, we did it on a status quo where you apply, you hold it. There are still costs related to that with ICANN and other fees. If you drove an impactful strategy, what would those costs be? Now, these are just scenarios, but the biggest driver in costs here are really around the people internally and those you may contract to help you drive this forward. Then we combine that, and we looked at 5-year status quo, DNS, brand protection, and a brand TLD strategy as the status quo, or making a digital shift, and we calculate what's the total cost of ownership impact. In years 1 to 5, it shows a difference of $2 million. In year 6 to 10, using the run rate from year 5, it's $3.5 million. And presumably from year 6 to 10, you could make additional improvements as well to make that even a more favorable number. So those are the cost side. But what about the top line and the margin side? So we looked at different types of programs that you might launch out there. So in marketing communications, what are the response rates you typically get today in big ad spends? Could you improve those ad spends? on channel management, particularly suitable for example, telecommunication companies that sell their cell phones through wireless shops spread around the country. Could you improve the management of that and the digital presence that you're displaying there? Social engagement. We've seen evidence already with early adopters that social engagement can be improved fairly significantly. Now, what are the branding value? So if you're driving that top line, you're also driving contribution margin because there's revenue associated and gross margin associated with those changes. So that's sort of the overview of it. I thought what I'd do is just do a quick sneak peek here and show you the calculator. So this is sort of an overview page that looks at the total cost of ownership and the revenue generation, the graphs that relate to that, and other areas that you might be able to drive forward in the future. So let's just go into a couple of edits so you can see how this works. So in domains, DNS, and TLS. So this case assumes the company has 2,000 domains. So we're going to change that number from 2,000 to another number, and you'll see it reflected up here above in the summary. So let's change that, for example, to 1,000 domains. You can see the changes. If we change it to 10,000 domains, you can see that your total cost of ownership changes accordingly. And every time you own a domain, you also affect the amount of time it takes for people to manage that domain. If you own it, you need to manage it. And then we go through a number of other variables that can look at enterprise DNS, how many certificates you currently have, what's the makeup of those certificates and the cost of those certificates. All of this data, these assumptions would come from your own business to build the case that is relevant to you. And then we've got people time. How much time does it take to register a domain? Someone who requests a domain. What about an approver, a second level approver, a domain manager, an IT resource? How much time do they spend internally? And then managing the portfolio. What percentage of your portfolio do you touch every year? And every time you touch it, you have human resource costs. So we look at all these different factors to generate this status quo model and a brand TLD model to drive it forward. And we've done that for brand protection, we've done it for the brand TLD, and we've also done it for the innovation opportunity about how you could drive change. For example, if you spend $10 million allocated to this for promo.brand.com, or perhaps it's brand.com/promotion, can you improve that based on trust and simplicity and clarity of messaging by using promo.brand? And even if you improve that by 10%, it can have a fairly significant change to your organization. So I just wanted to share the mechanics of it and then come back and share some of the summary. So a brand with 2,000 domains executes a brand TLD strategy. And over 5 years, based on these assumptions, they're going to be able to reduce their total cost of ownership on their domains. So status quo, let's say you increase by 5% a year. With a brand TLD, you can start to reduce or cull that portfolio as you make the market aware that it's your .brand where they should be engaging with you. And that will produce this chart. So if today you're running at $347,000, there's a potential to reduce that to $219,000 or even further, rather than driving it up with 5% increases year over year. Similar principle on brand protection. So if you do 10 UDRPs a year, your average cost per UDRP is $13,000. You have a number of domains you acquire at an average cost of $2,000. You can start to see this start to calculate. And if this increases just nominally even, you're going to drive more costs and brand protection over time. And as we saw from the poll, there was let's see, so I guess it's about 70% of people said this would be just as effective or less effective. Turning that dial the other way, you can start to reduce some of these costs because you're anchoring everything on the trust of your brand registry. So a similar principle, from $500,000, potential to reduce it to $340,000 in this scenario. You're never going to get rid of brand protection ever. It's always going to be a problem, unfortunately. but to be able to reduce it significantly can make a big difference in your organization. So if you accumulate those two together, you get a summary. From 844 driving to almost 1.3, or the ability to drive it down to 564. Layered into that, you have the cost of brand TLD ownership. There's the initial acquisition cost, and if you sit on it and don't do anything with it, it's still going to cost you somewhere in the range of $130,000 to $140,000 over time. If you drive it and allocate people and resources, your cost goes up, obviously. But if you notice the trend line is not as high, because once you own it, the ability to scale it becomes pretty economical. So that's the cost again. So on the summary side, on the top line and contribution margin, here are a few areas. So can you increase the response rate, conversion rates by 10% based on the better messaging, the trust, authority of that? I believe you can. I think these might be even conservative. Channel management. Can you drive improvements in top line by being able to drive digital content out to your channel that you control, you can measure, you can find out what's working, what's not working for some channel partners, and measure that, analyze, and adjust it, and apply those best practices across your entire channel. Social engagement. We've seen cases where brands have been able to drive a 30% increase in engagement, and conversion rate likewise would probably increase. There's also just straight up branding value. Your brand people inside the organization have complex models to justify their brand campaigns that don't generate immediate revenue. But if you're able to brand on this, what kind of a value could that have to you? And this is all thinking about these objectives, hitting these in a 5-year goal. So in year 1, you might get to 15% of goal. Year 3, you might be at 65% of goal, which generates these outcomes. Now, this is just a scenario for a brand. Your unique condition would change this materially. So as a summary, with that data and that input, you reduce your total cost of ownership on current status quo by $2 million. You're going to spend about $2 million to drive your brand top-level domain, but you reduce your cost structure so that the next year 6 to 10, you reduce your cost structure by $3.5 million. And based on the inputs we put inside the model, you can start to generate or visualize what you can do in terms of top line and contribution margin. So there is more. There's a lot more innovation opportunities that we see some brands doing and also that are yet to be developed. So if you think about what those use cases might be, so customer.brand, what could you deploy as a customer-centered strategy and prove the value you're delivering? Drive brand affinity, monthly recurring revenue, or efficiency in service delivery. What about agents? A lot of businesses market and engage through agent networks. How could that improve some of the performance of the business and those agents and the satisfaction of those customers in that type of a channel? Service.brand. We're starting to hear about people using it to create unique identifiers on the DNS to improve service delivery and security. And related to security, using your brand TLD to anchor your entire DNS network, where you can control all the security settings automatically by default with policies. You could drive out other types of use cases to extend that network security and trust, whether it's supply chain, IoT, cloud, EDI, and even considering in today's times, thinking about those remote workers. So there are other opportunities to drive out that really all depends on what your business objectives are, what kind of business you run. Every business is unique, but at the same time, almost every business has the same conditions that they need to consider holistically at the strategic level. So what are the business objectives? What are some of the new brand TLD capabilities that you could drive inside your organization to improve digital experiences and ensure trust in your market? And from those two reviews, Now you can start to look at what are the use cases that would be most impactful for us in our business, and then how do we develop an execution plan on that to deliver it and drive this paradigm shift over the next 5 years. So that's really about how to do a brand TLD strategy. So we're going to talk about that at another webinar on July 23rd. So I hope you attend that as well. So I hope you've also found that this was informative. Perhaps it delivers for you the missing link to help you unravel this Gordian knot to better demonstrate to your executives the value. My experience so far, when we communicate the strategy and the math, the C-levels are pretty compelled. They get better brand security, cost savings, opportunities to innovate and drive revenue and differentiate their organization. It's the third generation in digital identity on the DNS, and I believe it's going to change the world over the next 5 to 10 years, and we're seeing it happen more and more all the time. So thanks very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Peter, it's Martin. Thank you so much for that. I think that certainly illustrates the complexities of developing such models. I think especially, to tend towards specific organizations. So it needs that flexibility and adaptability to meet those kind of demands. So do appreciate you running us through. I know it's at a high level, but appreciate showing and illustrating that for us today. We have got a couple of questions, so if you have got any questions, do put them into the question panel. The first one I've got here is, Peter, if we would like to create our own business case ROI, how can we do that?
Yeah, well, listen, if you'd like to reach out to me, I'd be happy to run you through it. We can look at some of the conditions inside your enterprise and generate a summary on your specific business case. So you can respond to me at peter@authenticweb.com or through Martin, whatever might be easier for you. No obligation. We'll just go through it and try to figure out what works for your business.
Thanks, Peter. And I know we'll continue to do some work within the Brand Registry Group to move this along and raise awareness and details amongst the membership. So I've also got a question. I think this refers back to some of the indications of switching to your .brand. I've got a question here. Don't you think response rates will decline initially if the URL doesn't end in .com? I think that's...
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think absolutely there's a need for the public to become aware that what brand TLDs are. It's a chicken and egg where, we need to educate the public, but I think as where we come through all the different generations of types of engagement technologies, social is a good example, we humans are pretty adept at adapting. So I don't think it will take long for people to pick this up. The other side is it doesn't necessarily have to be an all-in-one or all or none. I would be driving test cases, allocating a limited amount of funds and doing, A/B testing against different campaigns and trying to understand that in the beginning before huge dollars were spent against it. I think as time progresses, you're going to see, and we're seeing it already, large organizations starting to push these out. So people will understand very quickly. People are pretty digitally savvy, especially this next generation that's coming up.
Okay, thanks. So there's more, so they're coming in. You mentioned a future webinar will be covering brand strategy. So somebody's asked here, will that webinar cover examples of business objectives, or will that be touched upon now? So I think just to clarify that, what have you seen companies determine are their objectives that can be realized using domain names and the .brand namespace?
Yeah, the core of that webinar, something that I've used for quite a while, is a methodology inside the organization. I call it the brand registry introduction path, but we'll look for some examples to make it real as well. So if you come there, you'll see a methodology. It's a structured program that sort of guide you through different phases with the stage gate, and we'll try to find some examples as well to make that real.
Okay, thank you.
Make a note on that one.
Going back to the cost elements, somebody's asked here is, could you clarify what are the biggest cost drivers in domains, the DNS and SSL type total cost of ownership?
Yeah, well, you know, everything's a function of the domains you own. Uh-oh, I have some construction happening next door, it sounds like. So it's all about the domains. The number of domains you own is really the function, or the factor. It's often underestimated that people spend a lot of time managing these things. If you own it, you need to manage it. So it's not just the domain, it's the people, it's the DNS edits, the security reviews and monitoring, and everything that goes along with that. Apologize for the noise.
Okay, I think we have one more question I've got in the queue here. And I think I might have touched upon this in my closing remark. Does this brand TLD strategy apply universally to all businesses?
Well, universal is a difficult assertion to make in anything. You know, businesses are different. But I think if you look at current operations, challenges, business objectives, my view is really that any business objective that relates to digital identity can be improved by using a brand TLD. It's about that trust. Consumer trust is critical. And we all live in this world where we're worried about clicking on anything. So if you can remove that and create a trusted environment, because you can control it, you can establish security protocols and security settings by policy. I think it can apply to almost all businesses, but there's always a limit on everyone.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I think that covers the questions that we've got in the queue. If anybody else has got a last burning question, do feel free to pop that into the question box. Otherwise, I'd say that we're coming to a close on today's webinar. Please do keep a watch out for details of our upcoming webinars, which take place through July. And just as a last check, I think we've covered all of the questions here. So do appreciate your participation. Many thanks, and look forward to seeing you again at our upcoming webinars. Many thanks,
Martin, and thanks everybody for taking the time today.